We are live. Good evening. I'm David Johnson, Transform Ed Consulting, and it is my pleasure to welcome Kendra Unruh and Sobia Khan. Kendra Unruh is PhD professor, Dallas College, Richland, Texas, is perspicacious there. I just washed my mouth and I can't do a thing with it. Perspicacious scholar of the evolution and appropriation of the Lindy Hop as it transmuted from a black working class dance in the early 20th century to a white middle class dance by the swing revival in the 1990s. She serves on numerous prominent committees dedicated to equity and justice for marginalized students. She also conducts affective and pragmatic training conferences illustrating how to create a sense of belonging in the college classroom. Welcome, Kendra.
Thank you.
Sobia Khan, PhD, Provost, Valencia College, East and Lake Nona campuses, Florida, served at Dallas College, Texas as Professor of English, Associate Dean, Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Grant Project Director, and Vice President of the Faculty Association. She also served as Dean for Academic Success at San Antonio College, San Antonio, Texas, where she administered academic and workforce programs and academic support services. Her publications and practice focus on questions of identity and belonging for colonized, marginalized, and minoritized peoples. Welcome, Sobia.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And tell us a little bit about yourselves. How did you get to where you are today? Kendra?
Well, I started off as a graduate student at Wichita State University in Kansas. And then I decided I wanted to get my PhD. And at the time, I had a little bit of an idea of what I wanted to do. But when I was doing my dissertation, everybody encouraged me to write about the Lindy Hop, which was the thing I cared about the most at the time because I was an avid dancer. And through my research, I really started to get into these ideas of who belongs on the dance floor, who does the dance belong to? And those questions eventually kind of morphed into looking at the classroom in the same sort of way and thinking about the institutional racism and classism and sexism that the same sort of institutions that dictate things like dance and cultural appropriation of dance, and how that also affects students in real life in our classrooms. And so through my research, my more academic dissertation research, I was really eventually led into thinking about some of these issues that became important to Beyond Equity at community colleges.
Very interesting that studying dance led to a social justice mindset and you continue it as a professor in a community college. Very interesting. Sobia, how did you get here?
Very similar journey through my graduate work and my lived experience as an immigrant, as someone who found a sense of belonging at a community college, and then eventually in the world of writing and letters. My dissertation focused on transnational identity and belonging, and that was literally the topic of my dissertation. And I looked at some key thinkers, such as Edward Said, who is a scholar, preeminent scholar, Jacques Derrida, a philosopher, and Teresa Hak-Yang Cha, a poet. And I traced their journey through writing and in their personal lives. They found their sense of belonging at an educational institute, very similar to how I found my sense of belonging in American culture. That all led to my work as a professor and eventually now as an administrator and into this book where we are now sharing practices and bringing our research along with our colleagues' research into the larger market and hopefully in front of other educators.
So I've got to tell everyone how I know you. So Sobia was working at San Antonio College. Bing, bing, bing. And I was invited to attend a planning event that the Alamo Colleges District was hosting. And I just happened to be lucky enough to be assigned to Sobia's table. And we've been friends ever since. And it's been a joy to know you, Sobia. It's been real great. So I'm wearing all of my Alamo Colleges District bling today. This is Northeast Lakeview College, where I'm now adjuncting, and I have all my bling right here. Proud to be a member of the Alamo Colleges District, where you once served, Sobia.
Absolutely. And
so how do you two know each other?
Well, when I started at Richland College in 2012, Sobia was one of the first people I met. She's a very friendly person, and I'm so grateful because I'm a somewhat shy person. So I remember one of the very first events that we had to go to, the convocation at our college. She came right up to me and said that she was excited to meet me, and she had heard about my research and was interested in talking to me about my dissertation. And I had just graduated at that point, so I was excited. Somebody else wanted to hear about my dissertation. And after that, we just, she kind of became my go-to person to ask questions and get help. And eventually we served on committees together and became friends, and decided that we wanted to write a book together.
So I should mention that I'm upset with you that you didn't ask me to write a chapter in your book, but that's okay. But we're here to talk about your book, Beyond Equity at Community Colleges, Bringing Theory into Practice for Justice and Liberation. So, Kendra, you mentioned that the idea for your book started some 10 years ago. What was the genesis of your book?
Well, actually, I'm not exactly sure what year it was that we first had the idea, but I do remember we were at the National Achieving the Dream conference, and we had just gone to a seminar together about teaching men of color at community colleges. And we were just taking voracious notes during the entire thing, because the strategies that were being put forth by the two speakers were amazing and practical and doing what we wanted to do, bring theory into practice. And Sobia, being the ever optimist, when we finished that session, she said, we could do this. We could write a book. And after that, we started toying with different ideas and talking about it. But it really wasn't until January of 2020 that we finally dedicated a weekend to just sit down, put our heads together, get a call for papers going. And little did we know, of course, when we made the deadline for abstracts, March 2020, everything that would be going on in March 2020. So we were pleased and surprised and really motivated by how many people, despite the pandemic, responded to that call for papers and were excited to be part of the project, even though their lives were in chaos at that time.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we probably better get right to your book, Beyond Equity at Community Colleges, Bringing Theory into Practice for Justice and Liberation. Where shall we start?
Well, let me jump in and kind of build on a little bit of what Kendra just shared. I think the two of us, having been exposed to each other's journeys, our colleagues' journeys, and then most importantly, our students' journeys, were really impacted on how can we lift up our students, share best practices, and then us being influenced heavily by Achieving the Dream and the mission work and the reframing of community colleges as spaces of social justice really took root in us way before we even started documenting and writing. I remember having discussions with colleagues. I remember us as professors. At that time, I was a faculty member in English, and we're both from the English discipline. We were thinking about how to decolonize our classrooms. We were thinking about how do we bring in equitable pedagogy without having this terminology with us. So the journey, in addition to the practical journey, we were philosophically involved in this work as researchers, as colleagues, as teachers, and involved in our students' lives, because we saw our students come into our classrooms from multiple places, from
Mhm.
multiple points of entry. And we felt that it was our responsibility to meet students where they are and take
Mhm.
them where they have not even imagined where they can go. And that
Mhm.
became the genesis of what this book is about, right? It's
So
beyond
would that be the premise then of the book?
somewhat, yes. The premise is how can we meet our students where they are and
Mhm.
how the evolving and changing demographic of North America and the world at
Mhm.
large, globalization, through migration, through just shifting of socioeconomic uh, frameworks, have really changed the way community college students and even four-year classroom students look compared to 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
So
So
you said a lot of things that I would like to revisit, if I may. I like to think of myself as a PK20 person, meaning I'm interested in the whole realm of education, not just higher education, not just elementary, not just secondary, but PK20. And in elementary school, teachers are noted as saying, I am a teacher. And in high school, particularly as we go further into the upper levels, people will say, I'm a social studies teacher. I'm an English teacher. I'm an English professor. And sounds as if you're saying that you are a teacher first, as opposed to an English professor or so on.
I'll respond, and I'll let Kendra also respond. For me personally, teaching is the first part of what we do as educators. But learning is where we make sure students have any kind of impact. So for me, the teaching and learning cycle is a twofold. It's teaching from our place of contact, but then ensuring learning is happening. So we're not sages on the stage. And again, by calling ourselves not professors, even though we are technically, right, we've earned our place, we have proven our space, but we're really decolonizing the classroom. And that's in essence what we're trying to do is learn from each other and be and really value what the students bring into the classroom. Kendra, do you want to?
Or you, Kendrick, please.
Sobia, I think you said it very, very well. And I like to also think that I'm learning something from my students. So even though, yes, I am the teacher, I'm also there to learn, because having an asset-minded approach to our students also gives them a chance to share so much with us and helps us better understand where they're coming from and the many, many things that they can teach us as well.
Well, why should anyone care about this? Now, you're professors, you have doctorates, you could be an English professor instead of a teacher. Um, and so you said many times now, decolonize. So how does that fit together, and why should anyone care about any of this?
Well, I'll start with besides the fact that it's our jobs to care about these things, it's I think for most teachers, it's our passion, it's our mission, it's what we feel like we need to do, it's what our students need. And that is first and foremost what community colleges are about: meeting students where they are, finding out what they need, and meeting those needs, even if that makes it a little bit uncomfortable for us, even if that takes us out of our comfort zone and makes us learn new strategies, new practices, new ways of reaching those students. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think the number one reason why educators should care is because we're supposed to care about our students, and that's what they need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and especially as uh, community college instructors, teachers, we are not only here to communicate or teach content. Our jobs are much more caring for our students, looking at a, working with the whole student and not just what is communicated through the content that we teach. It's a much more
Hmm.
challenging job. In many ways, we are constantly learning ourselves, without which we really can't connect with our students because neither Kendra or I or you, David, will know every student's lived experience, where they're coming from, who they are, and to understand our students and to kind of connect with them. That is a constant learning journey. And
I
one,
just looked at your. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please finish.
no, and one that we are hoping will be communicated through our book, that this is a constant learning.
And speaking of your book, you said something just now that prompted my thinking, and I looked at the table of contents. There are a number of chapters devoted to pedagogy. Now, again, I consider myself a PK20 person, and I began my professional career as a music teacher and took lots of music pedagogy classes. How do you, as professors, higher education professors, fit pedagogy into your thinking?
Well, I think what we wanted to do with this book is to bring theory into practice. So if
Mhm.
we think of pedagogy as the theory, um, we've learned about the theory through, maybe graduate classes, maybe through our own reading and research, maybe through professional development. But when it comes down to it, the most important thing for, I think, many community college educators is, okay, what do I do with that? What do I do with that pedagogy that has practical applications? And I know for me as a professor, when I'm sitting through maybe a professional development session and I've been given a lot of research, I'm just thinking, I don't have a lot of time in my day. I want to know how this applies to the classroom. So, yes, we do have chapters about pedagogy. And I think that, during my sabbatical, I did a lot of research and reading about specifically composition pedagogy because that's my area. But it was always at the end of the day about, okay, what can I do practically with this in the classroom? And so those are the sort of books that I'm attracted to.
Mhm.
And I'm hoping that's what we provided for our readers.
Mhm. Kendra, you mentioned the subtitle of your book, Bringing Theory into Practice. So, is bringing theory into practice a part of achieving equity? Is that your thinking?
I think yes. I don't think it's the end all be all. And but I
Okay.
do, yeah. I think that it is part of it, and I think that it's something that is necessary because if we aren't grounding our practices in theory and research, then we are
Hmm.
likely to misstep and possibly to be less effective and maybe even take a path that isn't data driven, that doesn't have that research behind it to show it as a good practice that is going to be beneficial for our students. So yes, I do think that that theory needs to be there, and
Uh-huh.
in order for equity to be achieved.
We're looking at the cover of your book. The picture that you use is "We want justice," and one of the bullets is, "What is the difference between equity and justice?" So, what is the difference when someone says we want justice? What is it that they want?
So I'll jump in and kind of share. Kendra and I debated a lot about how do we define justice, right? It's multifaceted. It depends on who is thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And what we came up with was multiple ways of thinking. There is no definitive way of talking about justice because justice to us is really the freedom to choose to make your journey, to have unlimited access, to have no barriers in front of a student so they can pursue whatever it is they want to. And in through the lens of education, which is our world, we are proposing through this book that all the different ways in which our contributors and our colleagues who have contributed to this book are suggesting that we need to be trauma informed in how we teach, because that is something that our students are experiencing. We have students who have experienced trauma. Another chapter is discussing how relational poverty theory needs to be considered when we're thinking about how to help students through advocacy centers, and through their food and housing insecurities.
Mhm.
And another contributor is talking about how action research really helps uh, give agency to our students to really articulate the questions and respond and do research. So, when we are talking about bringing theory into practice for justice and liberation, we're really tying a whole bunch of things here. We're
Go
one
ahead.
saying, that there's amazing work happening across the nation in the world of theory and research. How does
Mhm.
that, like Kendra said, how does that apply to us? And we are giving examples through the chapters of multiple people who have done just that, who have learned theory and have tried, revised, tried again, gotten student feedback, and then revised their practice again and again to achieve measurable outcomes. And
Okay.
that's where we see the shift happening slowly but surely, that we are going to make as a collective through our higher ed uh, world a
Mhm.
measurable impact on student success and student outcomes.
Could you give us a profile of the type of student about whom you were speaking?
Oh, our students are beautiful.
Well, there's so much diversity. It's really difficult for us to categorize community college students in one particular way. And we
Mhm.
we touch on that some in the introduction, as far as, you know, the vast majority of community colleges are serving people of color, are serving women, are serving non-traditional students, students with
Mhm.
disabilities, DACA students, students who English is not their first language. So there is such a diversity, and that provides challenges to be able to reach all of those students.
Mhm.
But we're reflecting the community. That's what a community college is. And so I think that that's important, that
Mhm.
they have access, and they feel like they're represented and they belong in that classroom, because that's what being a community college is all about.
I want to jump in
Mhm.
and add that both
Um,
and I
please,
are
please.
Kendra and I are community college students ourselves. So we have I think Kendra, I have my first degree is in associates of associates of science in graphic design. But when I was a student, majority of our students were full-time students and part-time workers. Where now, because of the social impact post-pandemic, and the economic disparities, majority of our students are now part-time students working full-time. Many of our students are mothers. Many of our students are veterans. Um, so, to Kendra's point, we have such a beautiful diversity of students. How do we connect with them? How do we resonate and bring their experiences into knowledge making that we create together? And that's the
Mhm.
world we're proposing in this book, to
Mhm.
look at education differently.
I'm going to take you to a different place, only briefly. Only briefly. I can remember offhand when San Antonio College was formed, but I do recall historically it was considered a junior college, almost like a finishing school, meaning that the profile of the student was someone who just needed a little polishing, and then that student might go on to a 4-year school, but at some point you can just say, "I've done it. I've got that gleam that I needed from the finishing school, and I'm ready to enter the professional or the working world. So what you're suggesting is that the profile of your student has changed dramatically since that period.
Let me also remind you, as the last before I joined Valencia College, while I was at San Antonio College, I also learned historically San Antonio College. San Antonio was segregated, and San Antonio College was the white school, and St. Philip's was the black school. So the history is really reflective in how our community colleges have evolved. At the moment, San Antonio College is more than 60% Hispanic population, where majority of our students are part-time. And that's the same in Florida, where I am now, and very similar to where Kendra is in Dallas. Big urban cities have evolved and have become diverse and complex and beautiful in just a healthy way.
There are a lot of things that I read over the last so many years where that suggests that the way we should think about community college is a lot different. And I'll say the last, or maybe even the previous presidential administration, the kinds of attention, the types of thinking that we should have regarding community college is a lot different than in the past, a lot different, and actually preferred. I'm looking at the clock. We better jump into that last topic. What are equity practices?
Well, this is something that Sobia and I felt very strongly about doing in the book, which is to have those strategies or equity practices very clearly laid out at the end of each chapter so that those of us who are very, very busy and may not have time to read the whole chapter can flip through the book and see, like, here's a breakdown of what you can do in your classroom or what you can do at your college that will help promote equity and justice. And so then if you read some and you're like, oh, this really applies to me in my classroom, you could then go back and read the entire chapter. So it's kind of like a quick, easy way to get a jump start on practical applications of theory in the classroom.
Well, Kendra, that seems to build upon your expertise in creating a sense of belonging in a college classroom.
Yes, and that's what it's all about in the end. And studies show that students have better success rates if they feel like they belong. They have better retention rates. But more importantly than all of that, because we do kind of talk about our ideas of success versus what success means for many of our students, it's important to our students, and it helps them feel like they belong in the classroom so they can continue to work hard and meet their goals, whether that goal is to graduate or whether it's to get a certificate or maybe just to take a class for the sake of, personal enrichment. But whatever it is, it's helping those students feel like they can succeed in whatever their goals are.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have less than 2 minutes remaining. Time flies, particularly when you're having fun and talking about a topic that we love. Students. Yeah, that's the topic, students. So if there would be a takeaway that you would like people to have from our conversation, what would it be? Sobia?
Yeah, I think what I would like, and I think Kendra is probably aligned because we're thought partners here, is that the work of educators is so impactful in uplifting community that we cannot underscore it enough. Our work is service work. Our work is impacting not just a student, but generations of that follow that student. And if all teachers, educators, start to rethink their reason for being in this world through that lens, then the work that we do in a classroom as an administrator now becomes hard work, really, truly. We're here to uplift our communities, and we want to make sure everyone has an equitable access to opportunity and an equitable access to success in the way they imagine it and the way they may not have imagined it. So,
Kendra, what's the takeaway you offer to our audience?
I mean, I echo what Sobia said, but also for those instructors who may be struggling, who are thinking, I just don't know what to do in my classroom. I feel like I'm a little lost. I think this book is an opportunity to find out what other people are doing in their classrooms across the country. We have people, contributors from all over the country, and one even from Canada, and see how things work in their classroom. I was inspired reading these chapters when I was first reading drafts and giving feedback. I started thinking, oh, I should be doing that. I want to try that out. Or that's a really good point. I need to be thinking more about the language in my syllabi and what that portrays to students. So I think these can be inspirational as well, because we are at a place right now where teachers and educators, I think many of us are feeling overwhelmed and maybe a little bit tired after the pandemic, and trying to get some inspiration back.
Great. Our guests tonight were Kendra Unruh, PhD, Professor, Dallas College, Richland, Texas, and Sobia Khan, PhD, Provost, Valencia College, East and Lake Nona campuses, Florida. I'm David Johnson, Transform Ed Consulting, and I must give thanks to my dear colleague, Cassandra Williams, who allows us to use her channel. And please go out and consider this book, Beyond Equity at Community Colleges, Bringing Theory into Practice for Justice and Liberation. And this would be suitable, this would be appropriate not only for administrators and teachers and professors, college professors, but for anyone who loves students and wants students to succeed. The chapters on pedagogy are on the mark. And of course, I'm the biggest fan that Sobia will ever have. And it's a pleasure to have Kendra and Sobia here. Thank you for joining us tonight. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.